Hola, Jim Heskett here, the Juggling author, to give you a little writing tip. We're going to be talking about writing craft today. And so the question that I want to answer today is, when is it okay to break the rules of fiction? Because, writing fiction has a lot of rules. Things like be careful with adverbs and don't head hop between characters and don't switch between past and present tense in a single scene. And if your scene is going to change locations, then you should have a scene break and blah, 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 and always end a chapter on a cliffhanger, and every scene must have dramatic tension and yada, 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 yada. And so the question is, well, you've got all these rules. Do I have to follow them all the time? Can I break them? Don't true artists just tear up the rules and toss them aside? Isn't that how true artists act? The answer is no. True artists don't just rip up the rules. True artists know the rules and then they choose when to break them, and they do so consciously with a certain amount of style. So I guess the answer to the question is, when is it okay to break the rules? The answer is seldom. Unless you have a certain style. If you write literary fiction, you know that there's a lot of very popular literary novelists, people like Cormac McCarthy and Margaret Atwood, who don't use dialogue, who don't use quotation marks with their dialogue. And that's fine, because that's sort of part of the literary voice. Now, if you're just starting out and you're writing a space opera or a paranormal romance, I don't think that you could get away with that, because your audience expectations are the audience isn't really gonna be happy if there's no quotation marks, because they might find it a little too confusing. But so one example I want to use, the example I want to talk about today about when it's okay to break the rule, is with there's a commonly held rule that says don't use dialogue tags other than said to carry dialogue. It's one of Elmore Leonard's 10 rules. And it's a rule that I abide by most of the time. Now, as part of my author voice, I break that rule as part of my distinctive way that I write my fiction. But I do it sparingly, and I do it very seldom, and only in certain circumstances. Basically, I have created a rule for myself that says the only time when I'm allowed to break that always use said rule is if I'm generally describing the volume of a character's voice. Instead of said, or occasionally I will use asked if it's a question. Instead of said, I might say he whispered, or he shouted, or he muttered, or he bellowed. But the thing is, I don't do this a lot. I do it very sparingly. And if I'm using an exclamation point, then I don't need to say he shouted. If I say he ducked down and cupped his hands around her ears and said, I don't need to say he whispered. So, and a lot of times you can imply the volume of the voice, but sometimes it's just nice. What you don't want to do is to do something like have one character ask a question. Do you like sprinkles on your ice cream? He asked. I do like sprinkles, she replied. That is what drives me bonkers and will make me put down your book and not read any further, because the fact that she's answering his question about sprinkles on the ice cream means it's a reply. So if you say she replied, you are double dipping, you're over explaining, you're saying the same thing twice. That is what separates an amateur who doesn't know the rule from someone who is deliberately breaking the rule, who's saying, I do like ice cream, I do like sprinkles on my ice cream, she whispered. Or, I'm not sure if I like ice cream, she mused. Even though that might be getting pretty close to double dipping there and over explaining. So there's that old adage that you have to learn the rules before you can break them, and that's essentially true when it comes to fiction rules that you can break. But ultimately, I think the answer is, if you're going to break the rules, 1, do it with some style, 2, do it sparingly, and 3, make it part of your voice. All right, guys, have a good one.